guys, how's it going? Today we are working on a project that's long overdue. Yes, it is May, and yes, that is a Christmas tree still sitting there in that pot. I considered taking the tree out before I started this project, but then I thought, well, maybe I'm not the only one with a Christmas tree still in a pot in May, because life. Anyway, we're going to be planting some really beautiful things in this container, including a Bloodgood Japanese maple tree, which is what I had in that container for several years prior to the Christmas tree. So I thought we would go over some of the things to look for if you're wanting to plant a tree in a pot. First off, there's Douglas. Hey. Morning. You're looking chipper, Douglas. Uh-oh. Russell's not happy about it. Do you want some pets too? Yeah, you're okay. But here is the Japanese maple. Isn't that gorgeous? Bloodgood is a variety. It's an Acer palmatum. And it just, like, this corner just begs for something a little bit taller. I mean, you can see with the Christmas tree there what I was kind of going for. So I want this red to kind of just fill in this space here. We've got pink mint clematis on these trellis, which I think we're doing okay. Looks like this one's coming back great. That one's coming back. That one, oh, I see green down in there. Anyway, that one's just a little bit behind. The really great thing about the pink mink is that they don't get so thick that you can't see those gorgeous trellis back there. What's the plural for trellis? Trellises? Trellises? Trellisai? Trellises doesn't sound right. Anyway, so it just becomes this really pretty kind of lush area. You can see it's first thing in the morning. This area gets morning sun, and then it's fairly protected in the afternoon because of the sun porch right here, the tree right there. I've got a beautiful grouping of plants just kind of sitting around here that we may or may not use. I just brought a bunch of things out. But the first thing we need to do is take our tree out and kind of just clear out this space. Now that the tree is gone, you can see how much it adds to this space, having something just kind of tucked in back there, something with a little bit more fluff. So the nice thing about today's project is that last fall or last winter when we put this Christmas tree in here, we completely cleaned this pot out and put fresh soil in here already. You can see there's a couple little maple seedlings that had sprouted, but given the size of the root balls we're putting in here today, I don't think we're gonna need any extra soil. Yay! If we had the same soil in this container from like last summer and the years prior, because when you plant a tree in a pot, you're not taking the tree out every year and replacing the soil. But if we would have left that exact soil in the pot, I would need to do a complete refresh to plant this brand new tree. So I'm super thankful that I don't have to do that today. Also, I do not use any fillers in a pot like this, in a project like this, because these aren't like annual plants that are really shallow rooted. This is something that I'm intending on keeping in this pot for quite a long time. It's gonna need the soil, like it's gonna need that whole reservoir to root into. It also helps keep things moist for longer, and it keeps the roots cooler and more insulated in the wintertime. And this pot is black clay is what it's called. So it's about like this thick. The walls like down below the lip. Of course the lip is thicker. And it's 26.5-inch diameter and 23.5 inches tall. Just to give you an idea of size here. Hey, bud.
Hey.
Are you here to help?
Yeah, I was going to do the video with you.
Oh, good. So we have our maple. We also have this gorgeous heuchera that's new next year. So we got it a little early so we could try it out. It's called Dressed Up Ball Gown. Beautiful, huge heuchera here with the bright chartreuse leaves, which I think will pop back in here. I think it'll look beautiful to contrast the red of the Japanese maple, but look at how huge the leaves are and how ruffly they are. Oh, I just think they are so, so pretty, and they bloom white, which is perfect for this arrangement because the other things that I have are Senecio angel wings, which I may or may not use depending on how much room we actually have in here. These may need a little bit more sun than the other things I'm putting in here, but I thought we might try. We've got some Sweet Caroline kiwi, sweet potato vine, which if I end up using the heucheras, I probably will not use this. I will most likely go toward this one instead, which is the Sweet Caroline raven. Oh, look at that. Isn't that awesome? And then we also have some double up white begonias and some diamond frost euphorbia. I have no idea if I'm going to use all of those plants or just a few of them, so let's get this potted up and then we will talk a little bit more about longevity of stuff like this in containers, what to look for, some key things to know about trees in containers in particular. So let's plant. I'm excited to have a fresh look here. Oh, you guys, I love how this turned out. I love it. First off, looks good to have something alive in this area rather than the Christmas tree. But doesn't that red just pop against the white house? I just think that's so pretty. And the placement is such, because there is a little flower bed down there, it forces you to put the pot out a little bit away from the house, which is perfect because it allows a lot of room for this pink mink to grow. And while it's not a super aggressive vine, it does, you know, kind of puff out a little bit. So there's plenty of room for it to still have a lot of light and airflow right there. Down below, this flower bed actually fills up fairly quickly because there are, I think these are Patriot hostas. These were planted before we were here, but you can see all of the growth points. So there's a big hosta that fills in there, and there's 3 of them. There's one there and one there, just about where the pink minks are. And then there's a ground cover that's really a prolific one. This is sweet woodruff. In the shadier spot, it doesn't get quite as tall, but if it's in more sun, it can get pretty puffy. But you can see the white blooms starting in on that. And then there's another ground cover that's kind of like lamium, but not. It's lamiastrum, and it blooms little soft yellow blooms. You can see all the buds along the stems there. But it's got the beautiful silver variegation. And then in this spot here, of course, we have the North Star boxwoods, which are putting on a lot of beautiful, fluffy new growth. Pink frost hellebores right there in the center with more sweet woodruff, which I'm kind of hoping it cruises this way and fills up that whole space. And there's a couple of bigger hostas. You can see like a hosta leaf there, and there's a couple coming up right there, and it kind of fills in this space with more of a weighty foliage. Here's our daffodil / viola pot from earlier this spring. I feel like I need to water it. Yep. Daffs are almost done though. And then just over from this area, you know, we have this flower bed here, which red tulips that were here when we moved in, and I pull them out, bulb and all, every year, and somehow they still reappear. I don't know what the deal is, but the Korean spice viburnum, I can smell it in the air right now, but this whole bed fills in big time as the season progresses. Anyway, I'm just super pleased with this mix down here. I did start by putting in the heucheras along with the senecio angel wings right here, but I felt like I was pushing it on a couple of different levels. You can see I used a pair of scissors and cut the lip of the pot down because I was going to countersink the whole thing just down in the soil reservoir. And I was going to do that because the senecio doesn't want as much water as the rest of the plants I was using in this container. So if you countersink a plant like that in a plastic pot, it just doesn't allow as much water to get to their roots. Oftentimes that will work, but I felt like that, for that reason, along with the fact that it may not get enough light here to be happy, I just decided to pull those out and use the annuals that I brought up, which I think in the end is going to be a better look all together. Less color blocked. It was looking too like compartmentalized and color blocked, and I kind of want a little bit more interest. I saved the tags out here. So the dressed up ball gowns, diamond frost euphorbia, sweet Caroline raven, sweet potato vine, and the double up white begonias. First off, these heucheras. Okay, so mature size on these, the foliage canopy is about at its full size. 10 to 12 inches tall is how big the foliage get, and then of course the blooms shoot up higher than the leaf canopy, and those will be creamy white. You can see on this plant there are a few bloom stalks, and I think that that will be perfect because a lot of heucheras, you know, bloom pink or kind of slightly red. But in with these other white flowers, I think that's going to be so pretty and peaceful to look at. Zone 4 through 9 on this one, when it does bloom, this one maybe is a little bit ahead of the other heucheras I have here. It's typically early to midsummer when they're in bloom. And then we have the Diamond Frost Euphorbia, which will grow about 12 inches tall. I kind of just want it to incorporate and just be this nice kind of ethereal, soft layer right up in here. And then the double up white begonias. So these are an amazing plant. Like, while they look fairly small right now, they will grow between 8 and 18 inches tall, depending on their location and all of that. And I've only been growing double up begonias for maybe a couple, 3 years-ish at this point, but I do find that they get usually on the larger end of the spectrum in terms of size. They do really well here, both in containers and out in our flower beds. I had double up pinks out in our flower beds last year, and I loved it. In fact, I ordered a couple flats just to pop into flower beds because of how well they did. But you can see they have a nice bronzy colored leaf, which is a beautiful contrast to our heuchera. And then of course the Sweet Caroline Raven, just for a little soft, trailing accent that both contrasted this and then brought some depth, like big time depth of color. I think it's just really pretty. And it's always interesting when you're planting around a tree trunk because, you've got the tree root ball and you can't plant anything on the tree root ball. So you're really, kind of confined to what you can fit into the outside. So that's where it's nice to have a nice big container. Beans, that these are rated down to a zone 4. These should do fine overwintering in this pot along with our maple. You can see the wind kind of picking up a bit. We're actually supposed to get a little bit of weather here in a couple hours. A big storm supposed to roll through and bring rain, possibly some wind, most likely wind. And then it's supposed to take a break late afternoon and then pick back up and rain for most of the night, which everything is just looking so good from all the rain we've been getting. Now, in terms of trees in containers in general, I don't really look at it as a super permanent solution. Depending on the tree you choose, where it's located, the size of the pot, you might be able to get multiple years out of a tree in a container. Of course, if you've got a slow growing tree in a great big pot and it's in a protected spot, you'll get a lot longer out of it than, the opposite. But I feel like it's such a good solution in so many different spaces where you can't otherwise plant something tall or big in the ground. I could never plant this Japanese maple in that tiny little flower bed that I just showed you. So the first thing you really want to consider is the mature size of your tree and the growth rate. So how fast it will get to that mature size, because we will treat something like this Japanese maple, though it will grow 15 to 20 feet tall and 15 feet wide given ideal conditions, it does that very slowly. Of course, your growth rate slows down a little bit when they're in a container, but we would treat this way different than we would treat something like, say, a willow that grows super fast. We would not be able to get near as much time out of a willow tree in a situation like this as we will out of a Japanese maple or some type of evergreen that's very slow growing. The next thing to consider is the hardiness of your tree, what zone it is. A rule of thumb when you're trying to overwinter a tree like this one, evergreen, perennials, is to choose something that's rated 2 zones colder than your current growing zone, which for us, we're in a zone 6, so it's safest for us to choose things that are at least a zone 4, rated a zone 4 or lower. Now, I don't always do that. This Japanese maple is a zone 5, so there is a little bit of a risk. There's less buffer. We've had fairly mild winters over the last 3 or 4 years. That doesn't mean they're always going to be mild, so I am risking it a little bit more. Given the fact that this container is in such a protected location, it's near our dryer vent. It also is protected from any kind of drying winds. We typically can fudge that kind of rule of thumb a little bit. Then you need to consider what type of container you have, what size it is. First of all, if you have a larger size container, you fill it all the way with soil, you're going to get a lot longer tree life out of a situation like that than you would with something that's a lot smaller that constricts the amount of growth that your plant can have. And if your tree fills up that container with roots super duper fast, then it's not going to retain moisture or have as much winter insulation as you would with a container that's bigger. I think I already mentioned this one is 26.5 inches wide and 23 inches tall. It's pretty good size, and we fill it from top to bottom with soil. Weight of your container is also huge, and that will depend on where you have it. Like in this protected spot, weight may not matter as much, but if you have a tree in a pot that's exposed and you get a lot of wind, you've got a lot of surface area, I guess, for that wind to catch on the top of that tree canopy. And if your pot isn't heavy enough, you're going to deal with that thing tipping over all the time, and that isn't good for the pot or the tree. And then the thickness of the pot too. If you're using some sort of thin plastic, you know, those heat up a little bit faster. They don't provide as much insulation. If you're using thick concrete or thick clay, something like that, it's usually just a little bit better for your tree. And then in terms of care, you're going to be caring for your trees in containers differently than you would care for them in the ground. Of course, the first year, no matter where you're putting your trees, you want to keep a really close eye on them, make sure they stay moist. That's super important. Probably, I don't want to say more so in a pot, but they just dry out faster in a container than they would in the ground. So it's something that you want to make sure you're doing consistently, checking on them every couple of days. Again, depending on where they're located and what kind of pot you have them in, you know, some will dry out faster than others, but watering consistently, making sure they don't completely dry out is super important. You're also going to want to fertilize, because the only fertilizer that these plants are getting is what you give them. You know, when plants are in the ground, their roots can reach out and they can find nutrients in the soil most of the time, unless your soil's complete junk, which we have areas like that, where we do find it important to fertilize at least annually, if not twice in a season. But for a situation like this, we'd probably want to fertilize, you know, in the early spring, again, late spring, sometime in summer, and sometime probably late summer. Not too late in the fall, because you don't want to encourage a bunch of new growth right before winter time, but probably 3 or 4 times a season. I'll also be sneaking a little bit of annual fertilizer in here, just to the annuals I put in between the heucheras, so the other plants will be getting a little bit of extra nutrients from that as well. And then when you're going into winter, you want to make sure to keep your containers on a consistent watering schedule. I don't care if there's snow on the ground, it's something you still have to do, because your pots can dry out in the winter just as much, or maybe even faster sometimes than in the summer, because like we have long stretches of super dry in the winter with lots of wind. Things just dry out, and I know it's the last thing on your radar to do, to go out and water your pots, but we put it on, like I put a reminder in my phone for every 2 weeks to go out and just splash a little bit of water on top of our containers, and that way the roots don't like freeze dry and we don't sustain a bunch of winter damage. So if you're doing all of those things, you know, making sure that the roots stay moist, not drying out completely, making sure you fertilize, putting them in a protected spot, I feel like is the best route to go. It's the safest. You should be able to enjoy your trees in containers for quite a long time. Again, depending on variety and growth rate, there's a lot of factors going into it. And sometimes it's trial and error. Sometimes you'll try something and think, oh, that wasn't the best maybe tree for that area, but I still want a tree there. So maybe you try something different. That's gardening. That's how it goes. And like the last Japanese maple we had in this pot, I think we had it in there for 3, maybe 4 seasons. Then we had a weird cold snap. It was in the fall. It was really nice and warm, and then boom, the temperature dropped and it sustained a bunch of tip damage, and it never really recovered from that. In fact, it actually went to a friend's house where she likes to try to recuperate plants. I should ask her how it's doing. So it didn't get pitched or anything. It just, like, the whole top died out of it, and it just had kind of some side branches with leaves, and it ceased to be a good tree for this location, for what I wanted, you know, the look to be over here. So I think it probably lives on in her garden, but it was just one of those weird things, and you can't really, you know, predict exactly what's going to happen. But you want to look out for signs of stress in your tree. You know, if the leaves start looking weird, if you start seeing leaf drop, if you start seeing roots on top of the tree, or on top of the soil rather, then you know that it's probably outgrowing its space. It needs to get out of the container and be planted in the landscape. And I feel like that's such a fun thing. Whenever I use trees or perennials in a container, being able to use them once for a beautiful arrangement like this, enjoying them like this for who knows how many years we'll get out of it, and then we get to enjoy them more out in the landscape once they are evacuated from this location and rehomed somewhere else, so we can do something different in this pot. So anyway, I'm really happy with this arrangement. One other thing I wanted to mention, all of these plants are good for shade, part shade here in our climate. You know, a lot of tags on Japanese maples say that they want full sun. Here in Eastern Oregon, they like morning sun and afternoon protection from the sun. Heucheras, this one can take sun or shade. The double up begonias, I believe, can do sun or shade. Yeah, I just grabbed the tag to check, but But double up begonias can do sun or shade. And then the potato vine and the diamond frost euphorbia, the tag does say full to part sun, but we use them in shade containers a lot, and I actually see them being utilized in shade, like hanging baskets that I haven't planted, but I see them for sale, and they do really well. They may not get quite as big as they would if they were in full sun, but they're really adaptable to a lower light situation. So this should be a beautiful show all season long. And I'm excited to find a new home for those angel wings Senecio. You know, I snagged 3 of them down at my parents' garden center because I don't see them all that often. And they're kind of on the spendier side. And as I was planting them in here and thinking about all the things I was trying to push, I like to try to push plants to do things that maybe they're not supposed to do exactly. But I thought that's too many factors against this plant. I really don't want to wreck it. So I'm thinking maybe some kind of like tabletop arrangement for inside the Hartley would be really pretty. I'm not really sure where they're going to end up, but it'll be fun to utilize those as well. Anyway, that is it for today's project. Super happy with how it turned out. I hope this video was helpful if you're considering planting trees in containers. It's really a fun thing to do. I really enjoy the way they look. So anyway, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.